Hello, Farpoint Cadets. Welcome to the next video in our course. I'm sorry this video is so late. I actually recorded it a week earlier, and then I didn't find out till I was editing it that it didn't record right. So I'm making this video to go over how to use Blender. We're gonna cover the user interface and all that cool stuff. I'm sorry it's so late. But it's here. So yeah. Somebody told me that when I'm making my tutorials, it would be a lot better if I put a camera down on the bottom. So I'm gonna consider trying that. First thing you guys are gonna want to do is you're gonna want to launch Blender. So after you guys have launched Blender, your scene should look something like this when you start. Actually, should really look more like this, except you won't have all this stuff down here at the bottom. This is previous projects that you've worked on. You guys haven't worked on any projects yet, so that will be empty. But I've got a few. If you have anything that's not 2.76, you're not running on the same version as I am. So if it's 2.75 or 2.74, anything lower than 2.76, that means that you need to go update Blender. If it's something above 2.76, like 2.77, 2.78, that means that I'm behind and I need to update. But I think this is the newest version of Blender. Okay, so the very first thing you're going to do is this is called the splash screen right here. So go ahead and click off of this. And when you click off of it, you'll see a scene that looks something like this. Mine might look a little bit different, but it should look something like this. The very first thing I want you to do before we do anything at all is on your guys' screen, it's going to look like this by default. What I need you to do is take your mouse, okay? Take your mouse, come all the way up here, and change Blender Render to Cycles Render. This guy right here, okay? This really needs to be Cycles or you're going to be really lost, okay? Here's the difference between Cycles Render and Blender Render. Blender Render doesn't look nearly as realistic as Cycles Render. Cycles Render is the newer part of Blender that focuses on photorealism. And for the most part, we're going to be doing most of our course in there. If you want to do like a cartoony kind of art, then go ahead and use Blender Render. That might work a bit better, but we're going to use Cycles Render for the most part. Okay, so the very first thing we're going to teach you is something called the 3D viewport. The 3D viewport is outlined in red right now. The 3D viewport is how you actually see what's in your scene. This is what is going to render. This is what the animation is going to look like. To move around in your 3D scene, take your cursor, put your cursor inside the 3D view window. Hold down, you'll need a mouse for this, you can't use a mouse pad. Hold down the middle mouse scroll button. Down here you guys can see what buttons I'm clicking. Okay, hold down your middle mouse button and you can just move the mouse from side to side and you can look inside this 3D viewport. If you scroll with your mouse wheel, you can zoom in and out. If you hold shift and you hold down the middle mouse button, you can move from side to side. You need to know about Blender, and I don't know why they did it this way. I have a few theories. We won't cover it in class because that's more advanced. But for some reason, they made it so selecting in Blender isn't the left mouse button click. You have to click with the right mouse button, and that's how you select something. Okay? So, when you start your scene, it should look something like this. Okay? I want you to move your mouse on top of that cube, and I want you to right-click it. When you right-click it, it will be outlined in orange. That's how you know that it's selected, okay? Now, when you do that, 3 arrows should appear. This is called your Y, X, and Z, or Z axis. Let's say I want to move something over here. I want to move this cube over by the edge of this grid. I grab the Y arrow, and I can pull it right over here. And you can go past the grid. The grid's really just there to help you visualize stuff. You can go as far out as you want. And I can move on the x-axis like that too, and on the Z axis. If you hit G, you can move them all at the same time. The next thing in your 3D viewport that you're going to see is this lamp. This is the light source. Whoops. This is the light source for your scene. This is where the light's going to be coming from. So when you render it, if you notice, you don't know how to render stuff yet, but this is what it will look like. The light is coming from that lamp. And so that's how you get light in your scene. I like to light it a bit different. I will explain that method later. If you look over here, this object right here, this is your camera. Your camera is gonna, that's what is actually gonna, well, it's your camera in the scene. I hope you guys know what a camera is. If you don't, maybe this course isn't the best for you. But to move the camera around, you can move it like any other object. If you want to rotate an object, just hit R, and then you can rotate it like this. If you want to rotate it on a specific axis, hit R and then that axis. So if I want to rotate this on the Z axis, I'd hit R, then Z. Z. Why is that not showing up? It should be showing. Oh, now it's showing up down there. I don't know why it doesn't always show up down there. But R and then Z. And then after that, you can rotate it on that axis, or R and X. And you can rotate it on that axis, or R and Y. You can rotate it on that axis. It's kind of funky right now because this is at a weird angle, but this is Z, this is X, and that's Y. If you want to rotate on local coordinates, if you know what that is, if you don't, then just ignore this part. If you want to rotate on a local coordinate, just hit the axis twice, and then you can rotate it like that, which is much more handy and helpful. But if you don't know where the local coordinate system is, then don't worry about that. We will cover that later. Okay, so that's how you move around your scene. Now we can move objects, we can rotate them. Oh, one last thing. If you want to make them bigger or smaller, hit S and then slide your mouse outwards or inwards, and that will make it bigger or smaller. Okay? And then if you want to scale only on a specific axis, like the Y-axis, you can do S and then hit Y, and now you're only scaling there. Or X, S and X, S and Z. Or here's a cool fun trick: you do S and then hold down Shift, click on whatever axis you don't want to move it on. So if I hit S Shift Z, then it scales on every axis but the Z axis. I'm kind of overloading you guys with information right now. I get that. Don't worry about that. Okay. You don't. This is really just a complete overview of Blender. Last time I recorded this video, I went over what almost every single button in Blender does. It took like an hour and a half to record. I don't want to do that again, so I'm just going to go over the basics this time, and then as we need to learn stuff, I'll explain. Okay, so let's restart that file. This is what your scene looks like. It might look a little bit different from mine because I've changed mine a bit, but it should look like this. Okay, that's all we're going to talk about for the 3D viewport for now. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to add objects, how to manipulate them. After this video, I'm going to be honest, I haven't wanted to record this video because it's a big one, but from this point on, videos should be coming out much more consistently, probably once every couple days. There should be a few a week. But yeah, I'm going to try to make them quicker too because it's kind of a pain in the butt for everyone when they're an hour and a half long. So now it's time for the next part, and that's called the properties tab. Is useful for editing properties, either for specific objects or for the entire file. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. Messing around here, you can get some really cool effects. So the very first button you need to know about. Oh, I forgot about something important. Before we talk about the Properties tab, take your mouse, go up here to File, then click on User Preferences. Okay. Now, if you have a keyboard with a side number pad, like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all in a box, then you're fine. If you have a laptop where your numbers are above the top row letters, if your numbers look like this, if you have this kind of keyboard compared to this kind of keyboard, so what you need to do is move your mouse up to where it says File. Click on File, then click on User Preferences. After you click User Preferences, make sure you enable Emulate Number Pad. Once you're done with that, hit Save User Settings, and then hit the X button. Every time you load Blender, it's going to instantly turn that on for you from this point on, as long as you hit Save. Now if you hit 0, you can go to the view of the camera, what the camera sees. Okay? So hit Render. So our camera has now just gone through and has rendered this picture for us. Okay? I'm not going to go over animation yet because we'll go over that at the animated video. The audio button is useless. Don't use it. Honestly, it's crap. Don't worry about any of these other buttons. So down here is our dimensions. This is how big the picture is actually going to be. So full HD is 1920 by 1080. If you are exporting a video for the Space Center, we're going to use it. What you need to do is make sure it's 1920 by 1080 unless it's a tactical, in which case it would be 800 by 700, I believe, is the resolution. I will tell you what the resolution needs to be. But these are the number of pixels and how wide the image is. Okay, so down here, this is also the percentage scale for the render resolution. So what that means is when this is at 50%, it is really, whoa. Okay, when this is at 50%, what it's really doing is it's 960 by 540. Okay, so it takes that, and that's the percentage of that number. And you might be thinking, well, why is that useful? Wouldn't that just make the picture have a lower quality? It does have a lower quality, but at the same time, it also increases what's called render time. So if I hit render, you'll notice it does not instantly create that picture. It has to go through and it has to draw every one of those tiles. Now, this isn't Blender just being fancy, trying to create cool little animation. It's going through every tile and it's calculating the all the pixels for that tile. Now, the bigger your image, the more tiles it has to create, and the more complex your image, and some other factors that we'll go into later, the longer this render time could be. Last night, I had an animation that I rendered. It took, I think it was 16 hours to render. So, yeah, render times can get really high, especially when you're having big scenes. So, to keep those render times low, keep this at 50%. And then when you're going to do your final export, and this is the file that you're going to send to the Space Center, change this to 100%. If that confuses you, just leave this at 50% until you're about to send the file to someone you're about to submit it, then change this to 100%. It will just make your life easier. Frame range, we'll go over that during the animation course, along with that. And we're not going to talk about aspect ratio because it's kind of dumb. Okay, metadata. We will go over that at the animation course too, because it's kind of stupid until that point. So output, this is where it's going to save the file. So the temp file is a temporary file. That's what TMP means. It's a temporary file on your computer that Blender exports it to. When it's exporting files to a temp file, it can actually be deleted when the computer restarts. If you have a Mac or Unix system, which is Linux, Mac, Ubuntu, I can talk, sorry. If you have a Windows machine, then it probably will still stay in there even after you turn off the computer. But stuff in the TMP folder can be deleted at any time. So really the only reason we want to export to here is if we're doing animations. I'll go over that again when we get to that point. But yeah, I'll show you how to do this more on the next course. Next video is when you're gonna need this. Freestyle, we don't need to worry about this. Okay, sampling. This is something, you guys took anything away from this video, this is one of the things. This would be one of the things I would list at the very top. You guys need to understand what sampling is and how it works. Okay, so I'm gonna pause the video real fast, and I'm gonna create a scene in Blender. Just to explain how this works, okay? Alright guys, I have gone through and I have made a simple scene in Blender. This scene is going to help us see why sampling is important. So, I'm going to render something real fast. Let's generate the image. And I'm going to leave all the samplings at the default setting, okay? So when I hit render, you're going to notice this picture. Look at how grainy it is. It looks grainy and looks like it's low quality. Okay? Now if I come over here and I increase sampling to 100, it's going to take a bit longer, but it won't look nearly as grainy. And I'm going to speed up the video so that you guys don't have to wait. Okay, we're done rendering. I did skip the video because if you look over here, you'll see that that render time was 47 seconds long. That's not that long, but I don't want you guys just sitting there for 45 seconds. That's a waste of time. Wait, not 45, 47. I can talk. I'm crazy. Okay, anyway, so you'll notice that the scene looks a lot better, but render times did go up. So what sampling does, I'd have to explain how cycles works, and that's a bit complicated for this course. But just know that the higher this number, the more crisp and clear your image is going to look. And typically, the higher the number, the longer your render times are going to be. So if I put this at 1,000, I'm going to go ahead and let this render 1,000. I'll skip the video, and I will show you guys how long it takes just to do 1,000. Alright guys, that animation is, that picture is done rendering. If you look now, you can see this picture is pretty darn crisp and clear. Honestly, it looks really good. But the problem is, if we look up at the time it took to render that, it was at 7 minutes and 55 seconds, which maybe to you guys it's not a lot, but with animations, you have to render every single frame of an animation, and the animation I had last night had 240 frames. So let's do some math, okay? Let's say it took 7 minutes and 55 seconds. Okay, so 7 times 60 plus 55. Take 475 seconds for every shot. Now we times that by 240. We divide that by 60. Divide that by 60. That would take 31 hours, 31 and a half hours to render an a 240 frame animation of this monkey. That's how sampling works. Preview, just keep this at 0. I'll explain that later, but just keep it at 0. We're not going to worry about anything else over here. Let's just come down here to, we're going to skip everything except for this, this, and this. Okay? So motion blur. I will now demonstrate to you guys the differences in motion blur. See the first ball that's moving? Looks normal, kind of, but something's missing. Okay? Here's the second ball. And you're going to notice this one has some like kind of blurred motion behind it. That's called motion blur. So motion blur, well, simply put, blurs objects when they're moving. Because in real life cameras, when you take a picture of a moving object with a real camera, it will be blurry. So if you turn on motion blur, it will make your shots actually look more realistic. And that's because with computers are so good at taking pictures that they are perfect. And when they're perfect, it looks fake because nothing in the real world is perfect. So I guarantee you this. If you can find anything in your house that is 100% absolutely clean, nothing wrong with it at all, I'd be shocked. Okay? So when we create a picture where everything is absolutely perfect, our brain goes, whoa, 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 that's not right. Something's wrong with that picture. And so what our goal as 3D artists are for photorealism is we want to make our pictures kind of look dirty and messed up and make it look like it was a picture taken by a human. So motion blur will make that more realistic. Just turn that on. And then the shutter speed, I like keeping it at 0.5. Okay, that will increase your render times. Down here, I'm going to restart my scene. This is what my scene looks like when I normally render it. When I come down here and I click on film, and then I click transparent, when I export this, the background becomes transparent, which is awesome. That is so cool, even if you guys don't really think it is, because that means that we can create some really cool stuff with tacticals. It makes our lives so much easier. So be glad for that feature. That's all we're going to worry about for this tab. I want you to take your mouse. We're going to ignore this tab. We're going to ignore this tab. We're going to ignore this tab, this tab, this tab, this tab, this tab. This tab. Actually, what other tab are we going to teach? Because I'm going to teach these two together, and I'm going to teach these two together, and these two together. I guess I can explain these ones briefly. Under the world view, click on the icon that says world. You can change the background color of the world, so let's make it white, and let's disable that transparent film so you can actually see it. And now our background's white. It kind of looks ugly, but there you go. We can make it red. Looks like that. We can make it green. Whatever you want. The default color is kind of this color right here. Maybe a little bit darker. That's the most realistic ambient color of light, so it will look best if you leave it there. That's all we're going to touch for that. If you come over here, the only thing you really need to know about this here is if you come to this tab, this is your scene tab, you can change the units Blender works in. None is set under Blender units. You can have metric units, or you can have imperial units. So if you want to work in feet and inches, then click imperial. If you want to work in centimeters and meters, click metric. If you want to work in Blender's units, which is what most artists do, leave it on none. Down here we can see degrees or radians. If you don't know what a radian is, don't worry about it. If you know what a radian is and you're one of those smart math whizzes, if you want to use them, click radians. I prefer degrees. Okay, that's all you need to know for the Properties tab. Congratulations. Okay, let's restart the scene. Talk about this tab over here. This is our hierarchy. Okay, it's outlined in red right now. The hierarchy is where we can view everything in our scene. Okay, so we can look at the camera and the cube and the lamp. They're all listed right here, and you can hide them by clicking like this, and that will hide it from the viewport. Or you can click this item over here, and that means it won't actually render, which is kind of useful. If we don't want our cube to render, we can just click that button, and look at that. Oh, now it doesn't show up. But we click that, and poof, now it does. Amazing, huh? If you click this mouse button, you can't select an object, which you might think that's stupid, but once you get like into big scenes, maybe you have a spaceship hallway, and that spaceship hallway has a couple thousand pipes in it, and you don't want to accidentally select those pipes when you're trying to work on the wall or something. If you select all those pipes to make it so that you can't click on them, it makes your life a lot easier. Okay, that's all you really need to know for this. One last thing, you can name stuff if you want. So double click on it, and you can name this cube like, we'll name it Steven. So here's our cube named Steven. That might be a quiz question. Remember his name. The cube's name is Steven. That's totally going to be a quiz question. Okay. So yeah, that's all you have to know about the hierarchy. Okay, our next one down here is the timeline. The timeline should be outlined in red. The timeline is the frames in your animation. So that's all you need to know. We have our properties bar. Well, kind of properties bar. This is like a properties bar specific to the 3D viewport. Okay, it's outlined in red right now. It's this guy down here, this entire toolbar. So with this toolbar, this will contain useful things. You really won't touch most of it till you get to modeling, which is the next lesson. But if you look down here, You can click on this, you can click like edit mode, and that's how you edit mesh, which we'll go over in the next class. There's sculpt mode, which you can sculpt stuff. That's a class that's going to be kind of more of an advanced class, so we'll go over that when we get there. You also have vertex, weight paint, texture paint. Don't worry about those, you won't need them very much. Down here we have our viewport shading. We can go to bounding box, which that's kind of hard to explain with a cube. Let me make a sphere. Okay. You'll notice when I turn on bounding box, that bounding box, it draws a box around the object, and so you can see like the bounds of it, which it's useless. I've never used it, but it's there. Next we have our wireframe. So wireframe, what that does is it shows the object like this. That's what a wireframe looks like. I'm just going to leave this sphere here because we keep using it. Okay. Then we have our solid. That's what it typically looks like. Texture, material, those we'll go over later. Rendered, this is what it will look like when you actually render the scene. It's like a little glimpse into the future. This can be resource intensive though, so be careful when using it. If you want to shift in and out of that using a hotkey, use Shift Z. If you want to shift into wireframe using a hotkey, just hit Z. If you want to shift between edit mode and solid mode, just hit Tab. And that's all you really need to know. Okay, down here we can select our different layers. Layers are useful if you want to have multiple parts of your scene that are separate from each other. Yeah, if you know what layers are in like GIMP or Photoshop, it's similar to that. Don't worry about these other buttons. You don't really need to know about them right now, and I don't want to overcomplicate this video. So, lastly, we have our mesh editing tools. It is outlined in red. Again, the mesh editing tools are used to change objects in the scene and edit how they appear. So the first button is translate. This will move the object. It's like hitting G. We have rotate. That's like hitting R. Scale. We already talked about this. I'm not going to explain mirror because that's what's called a modifier, and I'm going to have a separate lesson on modifiers. We have duplicate, which makes another one. And then we have something called duplicate linked. So look at the difference. When we hit duplicate linked, or sorry, when we hit duplicate, it makes another object. Now this object is unique. So I can come over here and I can like delete those. And when I duplicate it, it makes a new object and I can delete those. And it's its own unique object like that. But when I do duplicate linked, everything I do to any of them will affect all of them. That's kind of confusing, but watch. If I come over here, notice how everything I'm doing to this guy, it's doing it to the rest of them too. I can delete vertices, and we'll delete it on all of them. So duplicate linked is helpful for stuff like spaceships, and you want all the spaceships to look the exact same. You'd use duplicate linked. Okay. If we come over here, there's also delete. Guess what that does? It deletes the object. Fancy, fancy. We have smooth and flat shading. I'm not going to go into that until we go over our modeling course. Data transfer, that's confusing, don't worry about that. So that's the Tools tab. Now come down to the Create tab. This is the same as Shift A, but you can click stuff like icosphere, and it will create an icosphere in your scene. Or you can create a monkey, which, if you guys remember, this is the same monkey I used to light on fire in my earlier tutorial. So that's all the objects you can have. Here are curves, which are kind of hard to explain. We have different lamps that give off light, and other things like font, armatures, lattice, an empty, a speaker, a camera. The only one of these you really ever need is maybe an empty texture camera. I don't really use the other ones too much, except armature, but that one's really confusing. Okay, now we have relations. Go ahead and skip that because honestly it's a headache. Animation, that's part of the animation course. Physics, that's part of the physics course. And Grease Pencil, that's an advanced concept, so we're not going to talk about that. So with that, we are almost done with this tutorial. The last info bar at the very top of Blender. Okay, it's outlined in red right now. So the info bar is like the toolbar at the top of any program. Has your file. You can click on that. You can do file new, file open, save, all that. You have your render thing right here, which is a shortcut to the render button over here in the properties panel. You can click at that instead, or if you want, you can use the hotkey, which is F12. Windows, help. Over here we have a really fancy feature. You can change different. You can change between different views to do different things, and these all really require their own video because they're confusing. But like I can jump over from video to video editing, and poof, looks like that now. Or video to animation, or video, say animation to compositing. So for the most part, you're going to want to keep this on default until our next lessons, which I will explain in more detail which each one of those do. And then of course up here, skip this one right here. I honestly don't know what this button does. Right here we have our Cycles Render, Blender Game. Yes, you can make games out of Blender. No, it is not going to be good. I'll just say that now, because Blender is not a game engine. It's a 3D rendering engine. And that's something completely different. So, we like to use Cycles Render. You can use Blender Render if you want, but it won't look as realistic. So, yeah. It's also slightly different. The buttons are going to be moved around, and things will work differently. And I'm not going to teach how those things work. Mostly because I never really explored around much of it. So, stay on Cycles Render. If you want to go to Blender Render, you can teach yourself. Well, that is it for this video. If you guys will go to